So yeah, the main point of this talk is about corporate red teaming. So those of you who were here yesterday would have heard Justin talking about, I guess outsourced red teaming, where it's really important to test certain things, to, I guess, check certain checkboxes or flags that a customer is after. And I think corporate red teaming kind of can expand a little bit on that. So a couple of questions first. Hands up if you lead a red team. Good job. Okay, hands up if you're in a red team. We're lacking red team people. Put your hands up if you want to lead a red team. Okay, cool. So this talk is really based on my own experience, as well as, I guess, a lot of what I call benchmarking. So over the years, had many discussions with other red teams at various different industries. But all of this is, I guess, is my own opinion, and I'm very opinionated. So feel free to disagree or agree, and we can discuss that later. Also, if you're someone that likes to take notes, don't worry too much. There's like 30 pages of appendix with loads of different bullets, death by PowerPoint style, with a lot of little hints and tips that might be of use. So we'll start off with, I guess, benchmarking what is red teaming. So red teaming to me is a group of independent people from a diverse background, various different skills, different ways of thinking, different opinions. And they're trying to use this experience to solve problems, to give a different perspective. And of course, the most important thing is that we're trying to simulate or replicate those activities of a real-world adversary of some sort. I think red teaming is threat-centric, not vulnerability-centric. So it's not about running scanners and giving a Nessus report and all sorts of different things. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we have in our industry, is we have no commonality of all these different things, right? So someone will tell you they do red teaming. In my opinion, it won't be red teaming. They just run Qualys or something. Perhaps they're a penetration testing team, all different things. So really I want to kind of try and forget about colors a little bit. I know this is a red and blue conference, but just talk about the adversary and emulating that. So I want to start off by saying red is not best. So lots of people will say, I want to be in a red team because it's an elite thing and it's marvelous. Red is just different, right? So if you think about security as a puzzle, red teaming is just another piece in that puzzle. It's not a substitute or replacement for anything else. And we get this quite a lot when interviewing people. They want to be in a red team because they want to fuck shit up, right? That's what they say. And perhaps they're really awesome at doing that, but they might be better off at a very focused penetration testing team role, right? Because that's where their skills and experience is more beneficial. So we shouldn't be doing red teaming instead of, or a substitution to anything else. This is really complementary. And I think it's important to keep that in mind as we go through this, right? So in my mind, red teaming shouldn't be trying to replicate or duplicate something else. It's bringing a different perspective, a different vision, to bring different learnings and outcomes for that organization. So the reason for this talk is, I think rarely do we ever discuss kind of what's involved in setting up a red team. So lots of people I speak to who are in the red team, I say, well, how did your red team come to exist? Well, we used to be the pen test team, and now red teaming is the really cool thing, so now we're called the red team. Or we used to do vulnerability scanning, and now we do this. Or someone needed a red team set up due to some reason, so that's why we're called the red team. There's no real necessary reason why it is really a red team other than people like colors. And I think we need to challenge ourselves to do better. I think as leaders, we need to challenge ourselves to do better. And as you, as people in a red team, need to expect more from each other and from your leaders. So this is really hoping for you to go back to your companies and give your boss a hard time and say we should be doing this shit better or different, or being inspired, hopefully, to do it yourself better. So I really want to drive some change. And like I said, I'm really frustrated with all this color crap. So it's not red teaming, it's black teaming because we do physical stuff, and it's purple teaming because it's red team and blue team. Let's just do awesome, amazing stuff and not worry about adding another color or another brand, which just confuses things even more. So I tried to break down this journey of kind of building an adversarial capability into a few stages. So we've got strategy, buy-in, process, resources, people. I know it's terrible to call people resources, but it's not just people, it's hardware and software as well. Then obviously the execution, and then collaboration. So we'll try and go through these different stages and kind of give you some insight, I think, to what's required. So I don't think you can do any of this unless you start from a strong foundation. So depending on what you're doing already, you may be at different stages. So I try and think of this as like a crawl, walk, run, fly type situation. So perhaps you're already in a red team and you're at a certain stage and you think you can't go any further, but you can continue to push the boundaries. So really the first thing you need to understand is, what is the business mission? So what is it that you as a red team are here to try and help this organization do? And really for me, the whole idea of a red team is you're enabling the business to make more informed risk decisions. But you can't help them do that unless you understand what it is that they're trying to do. And you've got to be pragmatic with what you're doing. So you really need to understand who those key stakeholders are that are going to enable you to do this. So a key thing about red teaming is trust. Because I think if you're doing this properly, it should be against live production environments. There shouldn't be scope. There should be minimal restrictions to some extent. Obviously, we don't want to bring everything down. But that means you're going to have to get the buy-in from those certain people at the top. And that's not going to happen if you're just getting approved from someone who also doesn't have the courage to push harder, to do more. And don't be defined by what everyone else is doing, or if the organization you're at's never done this before, or other teams have tried to do this but they can't do it. Our job is to push harder to do better, right? And we're never going to kind of push the boundaries of what we're doing as red teamers unless we continue to put up a fight. And a key part of this is going to be to enable trust, right? So lots of organizations I talk to that still say they do red teaming, they're never doing it in production, right? Or they're only doing it in, it's definitely production, but it isn't. Or we can only do it in production, but at these certain hours. And I understand the reasons for all this stuff, but I'm sure most of you can kind of say from experience that a dev or test environment is never the same as production, right? If anything, there's never the same detection controls in those environments. So part of what you're trying to test with this approach is the ability to protect, detect, and respond. So how can you do that effectively? I think it's the guy yesterday was talking about a target, where you've got to go around and find certain people that you're going to socially engineer. I understand the rationale for that, but the adversary doesn't deal with any of that crap, right? So we have to manage to be able to do as close as we can and stimulate what the adversary is doing, but with control and making sure that we don't proper screw up, because then we've got problems. And like I said at the bottom there, failure to plan, you're just basically planning to fail. So you need to get a strong foundation, you need to get the right buy-in, you need to get the right support, you need to get the budgets and everything sorted out, or you're not going to get anywhere. So buy-in being the next stage. So you've got this plan, you understand what you think red teaming is, you understand what it is that the business is trying to do and what benefit you're going to bring. Now you've got to try and sell that to the right people, right? So hopefully you can get it at C-level, so at the board. So basically they're the people, the accountable people that if you screw up, they're the people that are in trouble, right? So if you bring down the infrastructure at a retail organization or a financial institution or wherever it may be, they're the people who's asked, you want to have, you want your ass covered by those people, right? Not someone who's not the accountable person. So you really want that support and buy-in. You're going to need things that people don't always think about. Obviously, financial support makes sense because you need people to be a red team. You need software, you need infrastructure. All these things make sense. But lots of the times, if you're doing this in the way I think is right, you're going to be breaching all of your company's policies every day, right? Because you're not supposed to break stuff. You're not supposed to impersonate people. You're not supposed to do any of this sort of thing. So you need to make sure you spend a lot of time, as part of understanding those stakeholders, is who in HR do you need to speak to? Is it privacy people? Are there compliance people? All these different people to get the approvals of kind of how you're going to operate. So speak to legal and say, right, we're going to look at impersonating organizations when we're doing social engineering. Are you comfortable with that? What's the impact? We're going to be socially engineering any member of the company, including the CEO and the CISO and the financial director and all these people. How does that work? What sign-off do we need? What kind of mitigating controls do we have to have in place? What information are we going to share? All these things are really important, or you just can't do it effectively. That also comes down to the rules of engagement. So when you're doing this, who are you going to notify? When are you going to notify them? How long is it going to happen? And again, I think you obviously need permission, because again, you need your kind of ask coverage. So you're going to be doing this for a certain period of time. Who is going to be aware that it's happening? So I think you should only have, ideally, no more than a dozen, if possible, people in the company. If it's a large organization, of course, if it's smaller, it should be less. Because you want to make sure that when you're doing this, it really is for real. So only a minimal amount of people know that it's happening, so they respond to it in that way. So the devil is in the detail, right? So we've got to this stage where we understand why we're doing what it is. We've hopefully got the buy-in and started to establish some trust with people. And so, now it's time to see if we can kind of document all this stuff. We all love documentation, but it's important to cover our arse. So you want to understand, what is your operating model? So when you do physical engagements, for example, are you going to break windows and smash in doors? Or is that not possible? Can you do lock picking and bumping, or that's not possible? What can you do? Can you drive a truck through the door? All these things, they might seem kind of obvious or stupid questions at the same time, but some people are going to let you, smash in doors and hire trucks and drive through doors if that's what their risk appetite is. And you want to have this all documented and get signed off by the legal team, the privacy teams, the HR teams, all this stuff, so that when you do it, and ultimately someone's going to ask you that question, well, what were you doing going in someone's bag, stealing their badge? Well, it was in our operating procedure that it was signed off, right? So you need to have your arse covered. And that comes back to the statement of work as well. So every time you do something, like I said, we're breaking the company's policies, most likely, in what we're doing. So the statement of work should define at a high level, what is the objectives that you're trying to achieve? When are you doing it? Who are the signatories? So who are the people that are signing it off? Based on experience, it can be really hard to get these things signed off in a timely manner. So when you're doing this from the beginning, you want to try and get things kind of pre-approved, right? So you're kind of almost asking forgiveness and hoping that people, read the email, and if they don't respond within a certain period of time, then that is your approval. I think that's one of the hardest things that people seem to get. So when I speak to different red teams about how many red team assessments they do in a year, you've got, I guess, the two schools of thought. Some that say they do like 50 red team assessments a year, and these are ones that, in my opinion, aren't necessarily really red teaming, because it's like a 1 week engagement, including reporting everything. And then you've got the other ones that say, we only do about 3 because it's really hard to get the different sign-offs for the people to do all the things. So somehow you need to find some middle ground. And I think Rob covered some of this in his talk yesterday, is you need to understand what it is you're reporting out on and what is the communication model. So when you've done this piece of work, how long until you're going to give them the output? So whether that be a really lengthy report, or you're going to present it, or there's documentation of all the findings, how are you going to do it, when are you going to do it? And I think Rob mentioned this, because you don't want people constantly interrupting what you're doing, right? Because it's going to impact your thought process and your flow and actually how effective you are. And if you're doing this for 6, 8, 10 weeks, or if you're doing it non-stop throughout the year, you don't want to have to keep on downing tools like every 5 days to give someone a debrief on, I've been looking through shares for 500 hours. It's really interesting, but really that's all I've been doing, right? And that is the reality, I think, a lot of time with red teaming. It's not that sexy stuff. The sexy stuff comes when you find that password in clear text file, and then it gives you access to all the things. The other things, again, these are all boring things, but important things, is how you're managing and auditing the tasks and the activities you do. So you're going to screw up, because you're humans, people make mistakes. So you need to be able to quickly understand what happened, who did it, where they did it, to help fix the problem. But then more importantly, I think, because I think most of the time you can be honest if you've screwed up, right, and help fix things. But due to this type of work, you're going to get blamed probably for issues and outages, right? So then you need this material to, again, cover your arse to prove that we weren't on that system, we didn't execute these commands, the activities that were taken are nothing to do with us. I can speak from experience quite recently that this is very important. Then we spoke, there's been a couple of talks over the last couple of days on intelligence. So I think intelligence is really important. So we call ourselves an intelligence-led red team. But I have opinions on that as well, of course. So I think intelligence is really important. You want to partner with either internal intelligence teams if you have them, or get intelligence from outside if you have the funding or availability. But I also don't think that you should be restricted to just using that intelligence, right? So we speak about adversarial emulation, and of course we should be trying to emulate the TTPs of the adversary, but I don't think we should be restricted to just those TTPs, right? So I'll give you an example. A couple of years back, we were doing an engagement trying to gain access to customer information. And the TTPs and I guess the modus operandi that we had of this threat actor in particular never had any evidence of attacking databases directly to get access to information. They always went through the application or some other channel to gain access to that data. We couldn't find a way to get access to that data the same way, but we did find a way to get DBA access and just take the data direct from the database. Then when it came to reporting that out, we had lots of interesting discussions with the intelligence team saying, well, that's not how that threat actor operates. They don't take the data like that, so we don't think this information is really helpful. Lots of interesting discussion and debate. And then 2 weeks later, I had a phone call from that intelligence team to say, guess what? We've just seen this threat actor that you guys were emulating a few weeks ago, and they've been stealing information direct from database. So it's like, wow, imagine that. So I think this is important because really if we're doing this right, I think we should really be doing anything within our capabilities and our budget or whatever it may be to find the way of achieving those objectives by any means possible. Because the adversary is going to be doing that, right? If there's going to be £1 billion paycheck at the end of it, they're not going to go, oh, well, we normally go that way, but we're not going to just utilize this other opportunity we've discovered. They're going to constantly adapt. And it's really about being effective over sophistication, right? So, and that comes back to my point that I was kind of asking Justin about yesterday was, why are you going to exploit something if you don't need to, right? If someone's just left something open on the internet, you're not going to say, oh, well, I can't use that because, normally I need to exploit something because, that just doesn't make sense. And I think the key thing with all this stuff, documentation is important, and we can use checklists to actually make our job easier. So a lot of the time, if we talk about checklists, people kind of might interpret that as we're taking their skill set away, we're taking their decisions away. But actually, I think it's the opposite, right? So if you read books on some of the really smart people over time, you'll read about decision fatigue, right? So we've only got a certain amount of decisions that we can make in a day before our brain kind of doesn't work right. That's why Steve Jobs always wears the same clothes, right? 'Cause that's one decision he doesn't have to make every morning. So if we document these things and we have checklists and procedures, then we can really focus on using our brain to make really educated decisions, solving complex problems when we're trying to simulate the adversary, as opposed to just wondering what was the right time to get the report in or what order should something be. Okay, so then we come to resources. So this isn't just about people, but people are the most important thing of any red team. So obviously all the foundational stuff you need to be able to make things possible. And when I speak to other red teams that they say they have an internal red team, but really they kind of outsource everything and use third parties. The number one reason why people say to me they don't have an internal red team is they don't think the work is challenging enough, or the work isn't something that would retain that talent. And I can agree. The leaders need to work harder, right, to retain that talent, make sure we're doing right things, push the boundaries. And kind of related to this foundational stuff that I said in the first slide, just because you can't do that in month one or year one doesn't mean you don't keep on going back, keep on changing the process, right? So as part of that crawl, walk, run, fly process, you're not going to, well, at least it's very unlikely that you're going to rock up to this company, set up a red team and say, right, we're just going to be kind of hacking your ass all day, every day, without telling anyone from day one. It's not going to happen, right? You have to start off in small batches. Perhaps it's just a 2-week test, and it's a 6-week test, and it's a 10-week test, and then now you're into just doing it 24/7, but perhaps that took you 2, 3, 4, 5 years to get there, because the trust thing is really important. When it comes to hiring, I think team fit is really more important than elite skills. You can kind of teach kind of almost anyone anything, but you can't stop an arsehole being an arsehole, right? That's just how they are. It's true. We've tried, it doesn't work. And you should also, I should say I'm not hiring. Everyone else is hiring. I'm not hiring. But when I'm hiring, we do have remote people. So I'm all favour for that. I also think you should be hiring people better than you, and also as much as you can better than everyone else in the team. Now, better doesn't mean some better skill. It's all about different ways of thinking, different ways of solving problems. I think diversity is really important. That also comes back to the remote thing, right? So the adversary is everywhere, all over the place, right? They're not all just sat in this one office in London or Poland or wherever, they're everywhere, right? So you want to have people that can reflect that. So you want people that can speak different languages, people that have different backgrounds, different cultures, because they bring different ways of thinking, right? That's what makes you an amazing team, right? It's not a red person, it's a red team. So you want diversification in thinking, different ways of solving problems, and I find this to be really, really helpful. And I also think that, again, if it's a team effort, obviously it's difficult if you're building from scratch because you tend to be just one person, but you can ask friends for favors. But try not to do this all in isolation, right? So you're building a team, so those team of people should have a say in who is going to be kind of brought in to this, I guess, family, right? That's the way I think about it. But I will say, and I've learned this mistake a couple of times, even though you want to, do this collaboratively, trust your gut, because the gut often doesn't lie. And the few times that I've hired someone that hasn't worked out very well, I had a bad gut feeling, and my gut was right and my brain was wrong, but I'm learning. So now, if the gut says no, don't hire them. And we really want people that solve problems, right? So less bitching, more doing. So we want people that when they find a problem, they have the initiative and the thought process to solve a problem, right? Red teaming is all about solving problems. So the door is closed, how do I get it open, or how do I get around it, right? So we want people that solve problems and come with solutions, not just this sucks, or this is crap, or I can't do this, or I've got 8 weeks to try and break into here, but it's really hard, so I couldn't get past the door, so I guess I give up, right? Because if we were really the bad guys, and our paycheck is behind that door, you don't just kind of go, sorry. And I also think you should test people. So I know there's a few people here that I've worked with before or have been into at different places. Test the people, right? So think about testing them technically, but also socially. So again, someone could be kind of mad skills on the keyboard, right? But you can't talk to them. They don't want to collaborate. They're just going to sit on their own. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but that might not be the best person for a red team. Perhaps they'd be better in some sort of specialist penetration testing role, right? Where they can sit on their own and not want to talk to anybody. And I know in our industry we don't like to talk to people, so that can be tricky. And not also, everyone can't think like the bad guy, right? So when we hit these stumbling blocks, we really should be trying to think about doing things by almost any means possible, right? And this is why it comes back to that original foundational stage is, can you only do technical stuff, or can you do social stuff as well? So can you do social engineering, so phishing, smishing, all that sort of stuff? Have you got physical capabilities as well? If you don't have these options, then you're really restricted. And obviously the bad guy doesn't have those same restrictions. And I think as leaders, back to that original point about people feel they can't retain staff, we need to constantly find ways to challenge and motivate people, right? So that's why I was asking who's in a team, and unfortunately there's not many red people here, it would appear. But perhaps if you do feel that you're not challenged or not motivated, challenge your leaders to give you more opportunities. But again, be part of the solution. Don't just bitch that my job sucks and everything's horrible here. How can you make it better? Come with options. And also, I think all of us, if we say not, I think we're probably lying. We all have egos, because that's kind of why we do what we do. But humility is really important, right? Especially in a team. I think it's important to understand the benefit that your co-workers bring. So they may not be able to do exactly the same things as you, but they're on that team for a specific reason, right? They have skills or something that they bring that benefits overall. Okay, so hopefully we've got all the funding we need. We can buy all the software, all the hardware. We've hired a ton of smart people based all over the place. And now it's time to actually try and do this whole thing, this whole adversarial emulation. So as I mentioned before, we want to have some relationship or some input in terms of intelligence so we can understand what it is that we're trying to emulate, what's their motivation, what kind of tools and tactics and things are they using. We really need to understand what the scenario is. So I don't like to talk things in terms of scoping, because by scoping it sounds like there's stuff that you can't do, right? Now we all know there's always stuff that you can't do, but I think in terms of framing something in the terms of scoping, you're already limiting yourself, right? So what is the scenario and what are the objectives? So just to give an example, I use this all the time. So someone comes to you and says, we want a red team assessment. We want you to red team our DLP solution. Anyone have experience with that kind of scenario? And the answer should be no, because it's not a penetration testing team, right? This is a red team. So again, not saying one's better or the other. This is just about a different perspective of looking at it. So really, if you're doing a red team engagement and that is part of the scenario, you need to take a step back, right? So the scenario should be understanding why has that company put DLP in place. Now, typically it's to prevent the loss of intellectual property of some sort, right? So that intellectual property should be the scenario objectives. That's what you're trying to achieve, right? So as an adversary, I don't think the adversary is ever purposely trying to screw over DLP, right? Maybe they are, but to get to something, right? That's typically not their kind of motivation. So their motivation is going to be that intellectual property of some sort. So that should be the objectives. Now, if you do it right, and you either can or can't steal that intellectual property, as a byproduct of what you're doing, you're assessing that control, right? So to give an example, the penetration testing team may do a penetration test of that DLP solution and the infrastructure. They may find issues and weaknesses, but I doubt very much they're going to find that it's not looking at IPX, because that's not what they're doing, right? They're testing the infrastructure and the solution and the software. But the red team will find potentially the fact that that DLP solution isn't looking for the crown jewels, because you've stolen it and taken it away somewhere, and that's the byproduct and the knowledge they get. Also think about vantage point. So I think Rob spoke about some different vantage points in his presentation. So insider, threat, opportunistic. So you need to be thinking about where is it you're attacking from. So are you attacking outside from the internet? Are you trying to replicate an insider? So perhaps they're disgruntled and opportunistic. Or are we talking about some sort of breach point? So assume breach that eventually we're going to get breached. It's not impossible. So we're just going to start from there. So the issue we always have as a red team is we don't have unlimited budgets, we don't have unlimited time, so there's always some sort of constraint, so we have to bear that in mind. So vantage point is important. And then of course the level of knowledge. There's been a couple of blog posts online recently talking about how much knowledge should red teams have, and should you just spend ages building up your own knowledge. And I think there's pros and cons of each. I think one of the biggest issues can be when you're starting out is you may achieve the objectives, and then someone's going to try and discredit you, right? Because they're going to say, well, of course you do. You work in this corporation, so you know where we kind of hide our skeletons and where we keep all the gold. So if you take the opposite approach by not knowing anything, and so you have to find out all your own knowledge, that can be more credible, but obviously it takes up time, it consumes cycles, so you have to try to work out what the trade-off's going to be. You also need to understand those boundaries. So like I said before, there are going to be certain things that you can and can't do. So perhaps the CEO is not going to be very happy if you social engineer him and steal all his shit. So you need to understand early on if that is something that you can or can't do. Another thing that people don't tend to think about in the corporate world, especially from social engineering, is impersonation. So if you send a phishing email from someone saying you're from PayPal, that's technically brand infringement, right? So you're breaking the law. But we know the bad guy does this, right? And lots of non-corporate red teams tend to do this as well, because I don't know if the liabilities are more acceptable. But you need to understand, if those are things you can or can't do. So if you do them, and it's very unlikely that PayPal's going to find out that you sent that email, so they're not going to come knocking, but if they do, you want to, again, have your arse covered, you want the backup. As I mentioned before, log all the things. So everything you're doing, log all the things, cover your arse. So when things go bad, you know how to kind of hopefully fix it. And when things go bad and it wasn't your fault, you can kind of get out the crap and continue to maintain that trust and validity you have already. Then the boring bits. So reporting your findings and kind of taking people through the walkthrough of what you've done. So I think it's really important to a red team to be based on facts and not opinions. So you might personally think that FireEye is a big, crappy, shitty piece of product, but that doesn't have any place, right? So you should really talk about what you discovered, what was enabled you to do, and be constructive with your findings, right? So perhaps you did find a way to mitigate a control that FireEye product was doing. And that's what you should be talking about, in a constructive manner, what it was you're able to bypass or what you're able to do. It doesn't matter whether you personally think the product is good or not. Be really clear on the impact. So I think we talk about this a lot in the industry of, I got shell, but shell doesn't mean anything. So you need to be clear. So you got shell in the box, what was the impact? This enabled me to do X. If it didn't enable you to do anything, then of course you still need to tell someone that happened, but what's the impact? The impact's going to be a lot lower, right? So getting domain admin, perhaps that doesn't give you access to the information you're trying to steal, right? Because it's another domain that you need to gain access to steal the data. Also, I think a thing that's quite tricky in red teaming is rating. your finding or the discovery, because this can change depending on the impact, right? So let's say that you find default creds on something, and in one engagement, that default creds leads you on to discover all the juicy things that enable you to achieve your objectives, right? So you would kind of identify that was at the beginning of the kill chain, or have you kind of communicating this type of information. So that would be rated quite high, right? So default creds on whatever was very impactful in us achieving the objective. Now, if you find default cred somewhere else and it doesn't give you jack shit, then it should be a lower rating, right? Because it didn't do anything. You still need to disclose it because it should still be fixed, but the impact is much less. I think the tricky thing that we really struggle with is communicating in a language that business can understand. This is something that I think I'm still trying to get better at, and most people I know are. So you can, explain in great detail the technical things that you did, but we don't really focus enough on explaining in an impactful business way of why it's an issue. And perhaps that's something that we've failed to understand in that foundational piece, right? Why are we here? What are we trying to do? What is the risk appetite? I think I had that on the previous slide, right? So just give an example again from experience. Perhaps you've been asked to steal a certain amount of money. They haven't been very descriptive of that monetary value, but you're like, well, £2 million is a shitload of money to me, right? But then you might steal 2 million, they're like, well, that's fine, that's within risk appetite. It needed to be 12 million, right? So you really need to understand what it is you're trying to do to make sure you're doing the right type of work and have the right impact. Use diagrams and pictures. So people might not understand technical words coming out of your mouth, but they can follow through a diagram to try and interpret what it is you're telling them so they can understand the relevance. And then the thing that I think is important is the controls effectiveness. So as we said with that DLP example, we're not here to test the controls, but that should be a kind of a byproduct of what has happened in terms of what we do to protect, detect, and respond, right? So as you go through this process, talk about the controls that you came up against. Did they help? Did they hinder? As far as you're aware, did no one see anything? So you weren't blocked. This is where you obviously want to speak to the blue team in that collaborative stage later to find out, did they really see everything and just decide to do nothing because it was the internal red team, who cares? Or did you really go undetected? And obviously when you're sharing this information, you want to do it in a timely manner so that people can fix and resolve things quickly. But we also need to make sure we do it securely, right? So especially if we've got all this information and diagrams, perhaps we're just painting a picture of how to steal the crown jewels from the company, right? So if you haven't done that securely, you're basically helping people, just give them a map. Now, of course, you can't control what someone does with that. I don't think there's anyone from Various Group in here anymore, but I think last year Various Group did some work for someone, and somehow that got posted on the internet, right? So again, you can't control what someone else does, but do what you can to limit that exposure. Oh, I guess the one thing that is really important is disclosure. So I think in general, back to the ego thing, we like to hold things back and not disclose it because we're like, oh, it didn't really kind of get us what we needed, but I'm sure next time that's going to be really important. And you kind of keep on doing this week after week, month after month, and then 2 years later you still have this thing that one day is going to pay off. We need to remember why we're here, right? So we need to disclose things because our job is to reduce the risk and help people make those more informed decisions about what they're going to fix. But disclosing stuff doesn't mean handing everything over, right? So let's say you've got shells or beacons or whatever it is you're using on certain infrastructure. Disclosure doesn't necessarily mean saying, hey, look, we've got these 20 beacons on these 20 boxes, but disclosure would mean explaining how you got them, right? So perhaps there was a vulnerability or misconfiguration that enabled you to get there, and then it's up to someone else to work out if they understand you've still got persistence or what have you, right? So you're still helping them give them knowledge to close the gap, but not giving the whole game up. Okay, so that kind of sums up, I think, the red teaming piece. So by day, we're these ninja kind of wearing people. But outside of that, there's more we can do to drive change and collaborate. And I guess this is why the conferences like this exist, so the blue teaming and red teaming piece. So I think it's really important to identify who you can collaborate with in the organization. So I think this is something that happens later. So remember, back to your mission, what is it you're here to do? So make sure you kind of establish yourself first at what it is you're doing, or you're going to spend your time doing everyone else's job. And that's great, but not so good for you, I guess, when it comes to review time and working out what value you're bringing. But we want to get to a point where you're understanding who are people you can collaborate with in the organization. So I think typically people identify that the blue team or the cert team or whatever you call it in your organization makes sense, but you might think that you only collaborate with them in this kind of combative experience, right? But I don't think it should be like that. So obviously when you're being the bad guy, there is some combative experience going on, but you're not doing that 24/7, or even if you're doing continuous operations, there's going to be times when you want to work with them and help them understand things. So in organizations I've worked at, we do this thing which we call mini detect, and I think it's similar to what they were talking about yesterday with the target guys. So we do additional work with them to check for known knowns, right? So we will run and automate scripts that when we've finished an engagement, if we're left with like 20 endpoints that have been compromised, we will run those scripts in a non-covert way to check certain things. Perhaps you can leak information to certain ways, to certain things triggering, and this is just one way that we can be collaborative in a non-offensive way and really help validate if those controls are effective. And the reason why I think it's important to do this from kind of unexpected endpoints, so you might say you do collaborative stuff and you always do it from your workstation or from a set workstation, but then the problem is you're never discovering things in a non-controlled manner, right? So typically, when you're doing an engagement, you're going to have multiple endpoints that you have access to in some form that typically someone never would have randomly selected, right? So by doing it this way, not only are you helping validate the known knowns or the gaps, but it's really random, and you're going to help people discover things that they probably wouldn't have discovered in a very rapid time. And in my experience, this has proven to be really, really valuable. We can also do stuff to improve education and awareness stuff. So the SE stuff is what's more interesting to me, and I'm sure most of the companies you work at have things like FishMe. Great things, we want to do FishMe, but I think all of us can probably accept that when we get a FishMe email, it's an awareness email, right? Because it's so poorly written. So perhaps we can work with those people to craft better awareness phishing campaigns, right? Just different things like that. And we can combine our skill sets to do greater things. Now, combining skill sets doesn't mean telling someone they're stupid and you could do their job better than them, because that's not going to get the right result, right? So the whole idea is that we bring great minds together to do great work, to have more impactful discussions. And this is something that I think doesn't happen very often, and I think also is kind of blurred a little bit with all this labeling stuff, right? So a place I currently work, we do lots of collaborative work, but then people have a discussion about, I really think we should do some purple teaming. Well, we do all this amazing stuff. Yeah, but it's not purple teaming. Well, it is, we just don't call it purple teaming, right? So we're getting caught up on a color or a phrase. Let's just do cool, amazing shit that has impact. Who cares what color it is, right? So we need to focus more on doing good things as opposed to whether it ticks some latest trendy box that we're talking about. About 5 minutes, is it? Or less than that? Okay, I'll speak faster. Okay, so just touch on the leadership piece. So I think leadership is important. I think people don't leave companies necessarily. You leave kind of a bad experience with a leader or a boss or whatever you decide you want to call them. So I think the leader's job is to not be a hypocrite. So don't expect more of others than you expect of yourselves. Your job is to remove blockers, right? So you should be the shit blocker, basically, right? So these amazing guys want to concentrate on doing their job. Your job is to kind of keep scooping the shit away so that they can focus on it. Help people to follow their dream, right? So we shouldn't be necessarily stopping people from leaving. Obviously, if they're great, we want to cultivate an environment so they do the best things for us, the organization we're at. But you should give them the right opportunities to do great things wherever they want to, right? To help them follow their dreams. Share your imperfections. I screw up a lot, and I'm happy to tell people that I screw up a lot. And I think that helps people trust you more, right? So in this type of work, and I've had this before, someone makes a big mistake, and then they tell you they didn't make the big mistake. So you go and scoop all that shit, and then one day someone goes, actually, I did make that mistake, right? So I think if you're more honest and open about your imperfections, hopefully they're going to follow suit and make your job a lot easier. From a team perspective, I think we need to do what I call start and end the race together. So anyone familiar with the Pareto principle? I probably said that wrong, but so lots of people talk about this in the finance world, right? So 80% of the world's riches are in 20% of the people. I think it's the same thing in a team, right? You're going to have a team of people that all bring their different kind of skills and values, but you can have different grades of player, right? So you've got your A players, your B players, your C players. No one is better or worse than anyone else. They're just different, right? Some people, especially in this industry, we're kind of mad for it, right? We don't stop, work. Other people, a bit more sensible, and at 5 o'clock they want to go home and do stuff. And that's kind of what is going to happen in a team. So perhaps 20% of the people are doing 80% of the work, but the key thing is we all start and finish the race together, right? So when shit gets hard, you don't just kind of go, fuck it, those two people are really amazing, they're going to do it all anyway, right? The idea is you keep running with them, you're going to get better, and you're doing it as a team. Challenge each other constructively. So if you think someone does something in a stupid way or a wrong way, ask them, understand why, be constructive, respect each other, communicate. Even people that sit in the same room don't talk to each other. Perhaps they just type on a keyboard. We should talk. Even more important in a remote team, right, that we have open lines of communication. As I said earlier, if you fuck up, speak up. Your boss is there to defend you, but he can't defend you if you're lying to them. And I think also ensure some research time, right? So the adversary is constantly looking for new ways of doing things. There's lots of great information around. People need to research, but they can't kind of flourish if they don't have the time to do that. So just wrapping up, if you're building a red team or in a red team, there's going to be lots of politics, frustrations, and crap you have to deal with, but don't be afraid to fight. Focus on doing what you know best. So you're not there, you're not a defender, right? So don't tell them how to do your job. Focus on doing what you're good at. Collaborate as much as you can. Drive change, drive excellence, do amazing things with different people. You're going to make mistakes. You can't do everything on day one. Continue to evolve, continue to push yourself. And the main thing I'm always focused on is progress over perfection, right? So don't let good get in the way of greatness, or whatever you say, however you want to look at it. Just do good things, iterate, make improvements, and one day you will be amazing. And I really think that the red teams that I've been a part of have been amazing. The people I've worked with are amazing, and they really help me kind of get up and energized every morning. And I know this is the idealist thing to say. I'm very fortunate to have spent maybe like the last 10 years kind of enjoying every day of my job. There's politics and stuff, right? But if you're not getting up in the morning and energized by the people you're working with, go somewhere else, do something else, or be the instigator of change. Make it happen. We can do amazing things. I'm finished. I'm out of time.
Yeah. So, any questions from the audience? Actually, I have one question. So you said about adversary emulation. So how do you measure yourself against how well your team is simulating a real threat? Is it a gut feeling or something more measurable?
You know I hate metrics. So I hate metrics. So I think there are lots of different ways to try and measure yourself. And perhaps I'm just making excuses, and that's fine. I'm happy to say that. But I think partly it's a gut feeling. But at the same time, I think it's very difficult to measure yourself. I think one thing I forgot to say is that all the intelligence we get, and those people do fantastic jobs, I couldn't do it. But the only people that really know exactly what the bad guy's doing is the bad guy, right? Everything else is some examination or some disclosure of something. So we never really know exactly what we're doing, right? Back to that database example I gave. So we get intelligence. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's shit, but we shouldn't constrain ourselves by doing it. So I think if you end each engagement knowing you gave it your all and you did the best you could, then that should be kind of the measurement of yourself. If you're doing less than that, then I don't think you need metrics to decide that you probably could do better.
Okay. Anyone else?
Thank you.
I guess not. So, thanks, Dale.